Today, we're looking at engines created specifically for the Thomas & Friends magazine. The magazine typically stuck to using characters from the TV series and occasionally the Railway series. But sometimes they would introduce a new engine if they wanted to tell a story that couldn't be told with pre-existing characters alone. I've made a video on this topic once before, but there are more characters created for the magazines that I've yet to cover. So today I thought I'd delve into the world of Thomas magazines once again. It's time to make a start. The first engine we're going to cover in this video is Victor, or Old Victor. In his one and only story he is just referred to as Victor, but the name of the story in question is Old Victor, which I think is a good way of setting him apart from Victor the Steamworks engine. Of course, the magazine writers wouldn't have had to differentiate between the two, since Victor the magazine engine first appeared almost a decade earlier than the other Victor. In his only appearance, Victor is brought to Sodor and placed on a flatbed truck that James is instructed to take away. Victor believes that he is bound for scrap, which causes him to be bitter and uncommunicative. A few days after James puts him on a siding, he hears of a new climbing frame in the playground, which turns out to be a refurbished Victor, who is happy with his new home and relieved that he isn't scrapped. In the original illustrations, Victor is a freelance 440 tank engine that doesn't quite match up with anything in real life. Finding a suitable basis for a Railway series styled Victor kinda reminded me of my old Rocket, Puff and Shunt video, where I had to find real life engine classes that looked close enough to the freelance designs I was adapting. There were various 440 tank engines that worked in the UK, such as those on the North London Railway and the Midland and Great Northern Railway, but the design I went with was the Caledonian Railway Class 1. The Class 1s were all withdrawn by 1938. My line of thinking is that Victor was likely due to be scrapped, and absolutely hated his time sitting on a siding, watching newer trains glide past him, knowing that he'd never get to ride the rails again. However, he was purchased by a small light railway before any arrangements could be made with the local scrap dealer. Victor was happy to have been saved, but still somewhat on edge, as the light railway he'd moved to wasn't in a great financial position and had only really bought him because he was cheap. When the light railway closed, he was sold to a lead mining company, but he was not very popular with the people working there. As he was originally built as a passenger engine, he wasn't terribly suitable for the work he was expected to do at the lead mines, and so, much like the time he was due for scrap, he spent much of his time on a siding, watching other engines go about their business. By now we're in the 1950s, and the lead mining company have decided that it's better to sell Victor than just have him take up space on a siding. By now, Victor had become bitter, pessimistic and self-loathing. So far, the people and companies who had acquired him had only done so because of convenience. He'd been in the right place at the right time, but nobody actually seemed to care much about his well-being or strengths. As far as they were concerned, Victor had been good enough for now at best, and a waste of space at worst. Victor got sold to a company on Sodor, but not the North Western Railway. Victor feared his fate would be one of two things. Either he'd be sold to another industrial firm where he'd be treated like dirt, or he'd be finally scrapped. He was sent away on a flatbed truck, which got hitched onto James's train at Bower-in-Furness and then placed on a siding at Marron Station. It turned out that the company that bought Victor specialised in playground equipment. Victor was painted up in a bright blue livery, similar to his original Caledonian livery, and placed in a play area in a nearby country park. Victor was glad that he wasn't scrapped and that he wouldn't be surrounded by people who hated him, but the honeymoon period didn't last forever. For every child who played nicely with Victor, there were others who were rough with him or even deliberately trying to damage him. Some children and families were kind to Victor and even made conversation with him, encouraging him to tell stories about his past, but they were few and far between. Things did change eventually, however. It was decided by a group of enthusiasts that made part of the newly formed Gate Preservation Society that Victor shouldn't be left to rot away in a children's play area. Some of these enthusiasts had known Victor since childhood, and heard him tell his stories. Eventually, arrangements were made to purchase Victor and have him restored to Steam. When Victor himself found out, he couldn't believe his non-existent ears. He was so overjoyed. Victor was sent to Gate Works, where he met his namesake, and is now part of the heritage collection owned by the Gate Preservation Society. He runs rail tours across the island of Sodor, and sometimes visits heritage railways on the mainland as well. And, with all that said, here is the finished drawing. These next two engines are ones that there is comparatively little information about on the internet. We know that neither of them speak, the names of their debut stories, and a rough plot outline. We don't know the exact publication dates or any finer details involving the plots of their only appearances. So I suppose that means there's a lot of room for my own ideas. Anyway, the first of these is Kingfisher, an engine that runs a miniature railway. He's not called Kingfisher in the magazine, but instead he was retroactively given the name by none other than Clive Spong, the final illustrator of the railway series. Spong himself mentioned that whilst he did contribute to the Thomas magazine at one point, he has no memory of drawing this character specifically, so it's possible that this was drawn by somebody ghosting Clive Spong's style. I think I did have the magazine issue featuring Kingfisher back when I was a kid. I certainly remember an illustration of a blue miniature engine running by a lake. I don't know what happened to my copy of the magazine, but years later when I first read the complete collection of the Railway series and discovered the Arlesdale Railway, I naturally assumed that the engine I saw in that magazine illustration must have been Bert. It was many years later when I rediscovered the magazine illustrations when it was uploaded to the internet and realised that no, it wasn't Bert after all. Kingfisher only appeared in one magazine story, The Tiny Engine. James has told Peter Sam that he is too small to be useful, only for Peter Sam to see Kingfisher at a water park and discover that there are engines even smaller than he is. Rather than a water park, I decided to set my illustration around by Skarloey Lake, which to be fair may have been where the water park was situated in the original story. The illustration ended up being very green, with lots of trees and shrubs surrounding the lake and the two railways. It is a lake in the woods after all. Basically, passengers can get off the Skarloey railway train at Lakeside Station, use a footpath to walk up a hill, and there they'll find a miniature railway that travels by the lake and through the woodlands. My line of thinking is that this miniature railway probably runs to a narrower gauge than even the Arlesdale Railway, probably something like 10 1/4 inches or maybe even 7 1/4 inches, as opposed to the Arlesdale's 15 inches. Kingfisher is proud of being the only engine on the Skarloey Lakeside Miniature Railway, or the SLMR, and enjoys the fact that he can travel to places that the other railways would never be able to go to. He enjoys seeing the Skarloey railway engines, especially since seeing them invariably means more passengers for him. He gets on well with Peter Sam especially, since he was the first to meet Kingfisher. Being purpose-built for the line, Kingfisher is still quite young and has a lot to learn with regards to running a railway, especially since there are no other engines on his line that can mentor him. He sometimes gets advice from the Skarloey engines on how to run his railway, although the usefulness of this advice invariably depends on which engine is giving it. But, with that said and done, here is the finished drawing. And finally, we have Little Barford, the engine with the questionable honour of being the only Thomas character with the word barf in his name. He doesn't mind, however, mainly because most people don't bring it up. Like most magazine-only Thomas characters, Little Barford only appeared in one story. He didn't even speak. The story featuring Little Barford is called The Cloud Factory. As you may be able to infer from the title, this story involves a power plant. It's perhaps worth pointing out that, while Sodor does have a power plant in the Railway Series universe, it is not your traditional power plant that burns coal and produces lots of smoke. Rather, it is a hydroelectric power plant. So, whilst Little Barford may work there, it makes little sense to call the Sodor power plant a cloud factory when it doesn't emit any smoke. In the original story, Gordon teases Percy for being small. When the two engines have to deliver coal to the power station, Percy discovers Little Barford and proudly tells Gordon that he isn't small, but rather medium-sized. As the hydroelectric power plant is in Peel Godred, it seems unlikely that Gordon would be able to travel there, or at least agree to travel there, since he thinks branch lines are vulgar. The line from Peel Godred Station to the power plant isn't electrified, and standard gauge trains only go there every so often to deliver equipment and tools for the plant. Usually these trains are headed by the engines of the Sodor Waterworks, but during a particularly busy season, Percy was called away from the Farquhar branch to deliver equipment there instead. The big engines sneer at Percy, believing that an important job involving the power plant shouldn't be given to such a small engine, and that Percy is only good for shunting. Percy shrugs it off, or at least makes out that he doesn't care. When he arrives at the power plant and discovers Little Barford, he is surprised at how small he is. Percy tells Little Barford about how the big engines think that small engines can't be useful. Little Barford laughs this off, claiming that if it weren't for his many years of shunting around the power plant, Sodor wouldn't have any electricity, and the island would fall into disrepair. You may notice that I've drawn Little Barford slightly differently to how he looks in the illustration. He's still a Kerr Stewart tattoo class, but whereas the illustration makes him a one-to-one copy of Peter Sam's design, I've decided to base him more off of Stanhope, another preserved Kerr Stewart tattoo. His wheels are in between his frames due to him being a narrower gauge than the Skarloey engines. Percy left the power plant feeling much more confident. However, Little Barford's words were at least partially a cover-up for his own self-esteem issues, as he'd never met an engine smaller or more confined to one place than he was. One day he received an invitation to attend the Skarloey Railway sheds at Crovan's Gate. Another engine of his class, Peter Sam, was celebrating his 101st birthday. He couldn't celebrate his 100th birthday due to reasons. Little Barford was excited about meeting other engines his size, but his mood soon changed when he realised that he was too narrow a gauge to run on the tracks, and had to be content with a demonstration line. Peter Sam sympathised with Little Barford, and even told him about Kingfisher, the smallest engine he's ever met. This cheered Little Barford up somewhat, and joined in with the festivities alongside all the other engines. And so, here is the finished drawing. And there you have it. 3 more engines from the Thomas & Friends magazine drawn in the style of the Railway series, with backstories to match. I had a lot of fun figuring out the lore surrounding these engines and figuring out what to do with them. I think I've managed to make each one unique. And of course, I hope this video has been entertaining to watch. If it has, be sure to like, comment and share the video, and make sure you're subscribed.